You ever boot up your old Wii or 3DS or whatever and get jump scared by pre-transition you and at least 3 family members that you no longer speak to? I know I have many a time, and I know I'm not alone. Maybe saying jump scared isn't actually my reaction. See, when I look at this short, bleached hair little guy with funny glasses next to, well, the closest thing you'll get to a face reveal, I feel this innate disconnection instead of any sort of anger or surprise. Like, yeah, this guy was me, right? I'm staring at him and he's staring at me, but it feels as if we're miles apart, and despite this being literal proof in front of me, I refuse to believe that I made this in my own image. Carved into the marble that is the me maker, wielding my stylus as if it were a chisel, I made this little freak some amount of years ago and was like, yeah, I think that's me. Let's talk about being present and memories and other fun stuff also. I've always been someone that's made stuff. Was it good? No. Is it good now? Male gaze is incredibly prevalent, debatable, but the important thing is that there is a lot of it. I mean, you don't just have a channel for like 9 years without at least a couple of Fortnite live streams and a couple of screen-recorded iPhone videos. And through rewatching these videos, I find it kind of hard to believe it was me who made them. And I think that's partially because it wasn't. I know, heartbreaking news for all the Video Game High School Episode 1 parody fans out there. The thing about art, if you're willing to call these videos art,
it's me and you, man.
is that it reflects you know, your innermost thoughts, your feelings about things, how you see the world. So when you're trying your hardest to live as someone else, it feels off-putting going back to these knowing that now. Sure, while Funny Communism Royale is an objectively bad video and seemingly has nothing to do with my identity, I would argue it actually has like everything to do with it. Just like the me's, just like the papers I wrote in high school, the shitty Wattpad poems I used to write while I was figuring out I was trans, all of them are parts of me, but a me that wasn't fully me yet. Obviously, a big part of it was that I was a kid. I made this video when I was like 14, but it's different when you're trans. If you've lived it, you know it. But that's enough exposition for now. Let's just put a pin in all that. Now, this may seem totally unrelated if you're familiar with the work, but I think Shishunki Bitter Change actually conveys what I'm trying to express, though probably not on purpose. I will be spoiling the ending of this manga, so you have been warned, timestamp on screen. Leah B, by the way, if you're still out there, you are the one that got me into this. I remember how passionate you were in your comment like 8 months ago, so thank you. Anyways, Shishunki Bitter Change is a manga that was published from 2012 to 2019, and the basic premise is that Yui Otsuka and Yuta Kimura swap bodies one day when they're kids. Yuta falls out of a tree, landing on Yui, and then they suddenly swap. But then they just, like, don't go back. 7 years, that is how long they end up being one another. At that age, a majority of their life has been spent being the other. I think going into detail on the dysphoria experience between the two characters would be quite interesting, but where my interest lies is the ending. Long story short, Yui and Yuta have largely adapted to their new ways of life. They've undergone puberty in the wrong body, they've pretty much reinvented themselves and how their social lives function. Nowadays, people don't bat an eye when Yui does something weird because, well, she always has. Yui, as Yuta, gets hit by a truck when attempting to grab a hat that had been blown out of her hands, while Yuta, as Yui, tries to push her away. Then they wake up, back in their own bodies. Turns out a near-death experience is what caused them to swap initially, and that's what turned them back. Hooray! Happy ending, they got their bodies back, is how it's framed. But I came away from it with this sense of dread. At this point, is it really their own body? Like, you have spent so much time being the other person, you've established relationships, made memories, experienced things that only you know of, that wouldn't going back to your original body fuck everything up? You have missed out on so much. These people who consider you a close friend at this point have memories of you which you'll never fully grasp because you literally weren't there. Your body was, sure, but you weren't. It's kind of like starting a body swap story all over again, learning how to navigate the other person's relationships and all that. But now it's in a body which is supposed to be yours. A body that you have been removed from for so long that I would argue what your body represents isn't you anymore. It's the other person's interpretation of you. Wouldn't going back to your own body after all this time be dysphoric in its own way? It's literally changed so much since you had it last. Granted, you were able to see yourself grow up, but it still isn't the you that you left behind. I think what I'm trying to get at here is the concept of watching yourself from the sidelines, disassociation in a literal manifest form here. Yuta quite literally watches his body grow up from the outside. He is merely a spectator in what Yui chooses to do with his body and how it changes. And it's further than that, right? Yuta doesn't know what relationships Yui has formed in his body. He may know of them, but he doesn't know the intricate ins and outs. He doesn't know every little detail of how she has lived his life. He's only able to grasp at the things she tells him or that he directly witnesses. So when he goes back, those memories aren't his, they're his body's, they're hers. To be even more on the nose, this is kind of what prolonged disassociation is all about, but instead of it occurring due to trauma, it occurs in this context through a body swap. I don't know if this manga has been discussed this way previously, but this interpretation really spoke to me. It's literally the first thing I thought of after reading it. Like, yeah, being in a different body would suck, but wouldn't going back after so long suck just as much? I think the disconnection being in someone else's body is somehow better than feeling that way about your own. In my opinion, body swaps have an inherent trans reading about them, being literally in another's body. I made an episode on that a while back. But I also don't fully agree with the born in the wrong body narrative that has been adopted by mainstream culture when talking about trans people. I think it works as like a quick way to communicate what dysphoria feels like for someone who may have absolutely no clue, and I guess in that way it suffices, but I also think it causes some problems too. The big one for me is that when taking that statement, born in the wrong body, at face value, it diminishes a lot of trans people's lived experiences. No, my body is not someone else's, it is mine, but it just doesn't reflect me. The result of that dissonance between mind and body is what could broadly be described as dysphoria. So naturally, that brings me back to funny communism royale, I guess, and by extension, all the other art I've made. The me that is present in these videos is so far removed from the me that is present now. Even looking at, say, the last video I made before this essay stuff took off, it feels so long ago. This isn't something that I was experiencing alone, I learned. I read an essay called Depersonalization, The Thing We Don't Talk About by Cassie LaBelle, and in it she opens up about a lot of the same concepts I've been discussing. Specifically when talking about how a lot of memories don't feel like your own, and how that kind of warps your perception of time. She writes, I have plenty of memories from high school, college, and my young adult years in Los Angeles, but those memories feel like they belong to somebody else in a very real sense. I was there, but I wasn't there. And yeah, I know that all memories kind of feel like this over a long enough time scale, but the way I feel about my past has changed so much over the past year. My life in 2017 feels just as distant as my life in 2003, which feels nearly as distant as my life in 1995. I have better recall of recent events, but the person who was there, living that life and making those decisions just wasn't me. She then goes on to talk about the grief that comes from both the memories that you weren't present for, as well as the ones that you just missed out on. This is a nearly universal experience, the pain that comes with knowing that you can't go back to change who you were in those moments, the pain that comes with remembering the experiences that you missed out on, the pain that comes with looking back at your old me's, or I guess more bluntly, seeing someone that is not a representation of your true self. There's this term I've been avoiding, but it's kept popping up whenever I would look into this sort of stuff throughout the last few months, and that is depersonalization. I say I've avoided it because I didn't want to come off as an authority on stuff like this. I'm still actively reading and learning more about topics I'm unfamiliar with, so I feel irresponsible acting like I know everything. Now, with that warning in mind, there is a reason depersonalization has been a reoccurring theme during my research, so I feel inclined to talk about it for a bit. It's usually coupled with derealization, forming depersonalization derealization disorder, or DDD. This is a form of prolonged dissociation caused by intense stress or trauma, where people often describe feeling disconnected from their bodies, feelings, and/or environment. When looking into depersonalization specifically, you start to see a lot of links to common symptoms expressed when dealing with dysphoria. Being disconnected from thoughts, feelings in your own body, being emotionally numb, feeling as if you're observing yourself from outside your own body, etc. It turns out that I am far from the first person to connect these dots, and I came across the Transgender Depersonalization Project, which has documented a lot of studies and a ton of anecdotes linking symptoms of gender dysphoria to DDD in an effort to better understand how to treat it in trans people. One of the studies mentioned, published in 2015, finds that dissociative disorders are more prevalent in trans people, almost 30% compared to the general population's 12%. And after receiving hormone replacement therapy, it was found that the patients reported lower dissociative symptoms. While this study did test for many different dissociative disorders, it's important to note that specifically depersonalization among those tested was one of the ones with a significant decrease. Personally, I'm not that surprised, right? It makes sense, both the increased prevalence of dissociative disorders and then the lowering of them after beginning HRT. The intense stress of feeling disconnected from your body alongside many different traumatic events would lead to higher rates of DDD, whether that be specifically from those events or as a coping mechanism that develops over time in reaction to them. This is not to say that HRT was the fix, but it definitely had a lot of positive effects on trans people that were experiencing dissociative disorders. So after discussing all of this and straining my eyes looking at charts for way too long, how do I tie this back to me's and feeling disconnected from your memories? Well, let's just sound like a broken record here. It's hard to look back at these memories where I had to hide so much, bottling up so many emotions I couldn't even name and just trying to live life on autopilot. When looking at my attempts to declare who I was or what I wanted through the works that I made, I was never really able to do so. This is the most apparent in those moments where I was supposed to represent myself. I think as a kid, and still now sometimes, I've always really struggled to depict myself in a way that I'm happy with. I've heard countless stories from my trans friends about how some character creator or a role-playing game, or maybe how they've expressed themselves online, is what allowed them to explore their own identity. I've never been able to do that in a way that would be like expected of me. For example, I think D&D is really cool. Go ahead and mark that one down on your bingo card. But in creating a character for myself, I've never been able to create anything femme-leaning. Typically, characters I create are over the top in their masculinity, akin to characters like Johnny, Kamina, Tengen, that sort of flashy guy with big muscles trope in a lot of anime. I've always been so drawn to this archetype, and that's reflected in the characters that I choose to create, even though my actual self couldn't be further from that. My game theory is that in choosing to do that, there's this degree of separation that's being manufactured between myself and the characters that I choose to represent me, almost like a veil of irony. Like a, hey, isn't it funny that little old me is playing this macho guy with 12 abs that only speaks in one-liners? That's crazy, right? So not like me. Maybe this inclination to create these over-the-top characters was in response to that feeling of disconnection felt when looking at my past creations. Maybe because this guy right here was a genuine attempt to capture how I saw myself at the time, is why it makes me kind of sad to look at now. Meanwhile, I can look back at my ironic ultra-masculine characters and still laugh a little. This habit hasn't really gone away either, though I do recognize it now. When choosing the quote-unquote face of my channel, I struggled a lot in finding a balance between how masculine or how feminine I wanted it to look. In case you were wondering, she's a blend of Kamina from Gurren Lagann and Amy from I Love Amy, two characters I would describe as polar opposites but see myself in different ways. That being said, she doesn't even have a body. I never figured that part out because I didn't want to face the commitment required to represent myself that much. I didn't know if I could do it in a way that I would be satisfied with, that I could look back on and recognize that, like, hey, that is me. There's no eyes behind the glasses, by the way. So what did we learn today? Well, I don't really know. This was more of a therapy session for me, but maybe you took something away. I think because of dysphoria and the prevalence of dissociative disorders that come alongside it, it makes these periods of time where you're not really you that much harder to look back on. In the essay I mentioned earlier, LaBelle proposes the concept of repersonalization, where she equates beginning her transition to the feeling of finding a missing piece of your soul, thawing out the you that had been frozen at your core. One thing she mentions at the end is making up little stories about what she thought she might have been like as a teenage girl to reclaim some of those memories, and I think that's really sweet. It brings me a lot of joy thinking about that. For me personally, I've always found a lot of enjoyment going back to things that meant a lot to me at the time, seeing them through a different lens compared to my past self, like replaying games as the girl now and using my chosen name. This process I will be calling me personalization, so please don't steal it. It is mine. You can't use it without crediting me, and if you do, you have to credit.